Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Shamil Turner, Manager Enterprise Solutions Architects at Figma. The topic of today's episode is balancing pre- and post-sales in the world of startups. This is a very interesting topic and one that really resonates with me. When I started my pre-sales career, I was on the implementation team. I was a customer engagement manager and we didn't have a pre-sales team. So I was brought on to sales calls to talk about our technology because I was a subject matter expert from hospitality. When I went over to Showpad, we did not have a pre-sales team. Same situation. I was kind of brought in to be the first SC and build that organization, but I was working on both sides of the fence. And it was a very interesting role. It was fun, but it was hard. And today's episode, Shamil is going to talk about that experience at his current company, Figma, but he's got a lot of experience doing this at different companies. For us at PreSales Collective, we do see and hear a number of folks who say, hey, I'm the first SC. This is what my job is. Is this right? How should I build my org? How should I build roles and responsibilities? So we're going to talk about it in today's podcast episode. Again, this isn't necessarily the guide on how to manage pre and post sale work under one function, but it talks about what a lot of the early stage companies have to do to go to market, build success, and build happy customers. Enjoy.
Vivint offers a way for companies to deliver an incredible buyer experience, with pre-sales leading the charge. With Vivint, companies can meet the demanding needs of the sales-proof buyer by aligning sales with product, providing repeatable workflows, delivering on-demand product expertise, and winning more deals with transparency and trust. For more information, visit vivint.com.
Shamil, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you today?
I am fantastic. How are you?
I'm happy to have you on the podcast. I feel like you've raised your hand a couple of times over the past year to get involved, to present or speak on specific content. And we've been talking about bringing you on the podcast. And so here we are. We're finally recording. And I think what's so nice about recording a podcast with someone who I've already met in person is it just kind of helps the relationship. So we actually got to meet in New York at the local event. So one, it was great to meet you in person. How was your experience at the New York in-person event?
It was incredible. The thing about it is you never know like how many folks that are in the space are out there. And then you see an event like that, you go to it and you don't know, like, will there be nervousness? Will people not be like ready to shake your hand? I know it's COVID times. Everybody was in it. Everybody was in it to meet people. Everybody's like, hey, I work for this great company. Everybody's hiring. Everybody's trying to recruit. It was fantastic just to meet people on a personal level and then realize the different types of pre-sales and post-sales that exist out there. I had a conversation with a gentleman that was purely focused on like digital landscaping. So they actually use drones to like go in and model out locations. And then they use that data nowadays to kind of help with land surveying when you couldn't send people out there traditionally because of COVID. So it's incredible the types of pre-sales that exist today. And I was very thankful to be at the location and kind of having a good time with everybody and a few drinks.
I love that perspective. And I think for me, it was the first New York event where we were July of last summer, right before COVID was picking back up. But Ryan LaValle, who's a VP over at Salesforce, was like, it's great to be in a room full of people who know what I do for a living. And that just kind of helps, you know? It's like, oh, wow, there's other people who do this job. And it makes the pre-sales world a little bit smaller. And so it's one of my favorite things that we do. So I was glad to meet you. I'm glad you had a great time.
My mom still thinks I just work with computers.
Oh, man. And then they call you and they say, hey, will you fix this? And you're like, this is not what I do.
It's like, no, I can't. But actually, yes, I can. Sorry. I'll see you next week, Mom.
Love it. So Shamil, before we get into today's topic of balancing pre and post sales in the world of startups, which is definitely a near and dear topic to me, I would love to hear about your career journey. What got you to where you are today?
It's funny. I'm part of that like original crop of like pre-sales folks that did not know what pre-sales were. They were just kind of doing this thing. I started my career out in like traditional IT support, and eventually like worked my way into becoming a systems engineer for like a healthcare center. And what would happen were folks would come in every time we would buy a new clinical application or whatever, and they would like convince the business that this is the best way to go. And I would build that server infrastructure to support their product. This was in the early days of like cloud, but people were building like internal cloud with VMware and ESX centers. So I would build a server infrastructure. And it was one of those poor collaboration or poor business efforts where a vendor came in, they sold the healthcare center on SharePoint, and then they left. And if anyone knows SharePoint, you have to maintain it. You have to meet with the business to fine tune what SharePoint can do because it can do everything. And there was a question, hey, does anyone want to own this internally? And I raised my hand. And then I got closer to the world of pre-sales. I was literally working with doctors and nurses to kind of solve their problems with this product. So I was going in saying, hey, what are your requirements? Like, what's the pain? What would be a better state for you? What would the positive outcomes be if we had a better solution? And then, I would build this differentiated experience leveraging the product of SharePoint for my internal stakeholders. And I did this leveraging a few vendors. And one of those vendors said, hey, we're hiring in New York for this role of, I think it was called solutions consultant at the time, or no, solutions engineer. I'm like, what do you mean? I have this comfy job. I'm back in IT. I'm good, besides on call from time to time. And they're like, you're actually already doing this role. And I'm like, what do you mean? You're talking with people, you're understanding their pain points, and you're solving them with the product. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm in IT. What do you mean? So they kind of took me through it and convinced me like I can do this thing. And 2 years later, I was a principal for them, not only selling the solution, but also delivering some post-sale stuff. They were about a company of 200. So I have pre and post in my DNA. And then basically from that point, I was just crushing it, leading through influencing without actually having the title of a manager or lead. And just like in this world of pre-sales, after, working with them and being a Microsoft partner for years and years and years, I decided like I need to get out of the Microsoft ecosystem and have a little bit of this Silicon Valley fun that you see on TV and you hear about. And I joined Dropbox back when they had a tuck shop. People know what I mean if you know Dropbox. And from there, I was able to kind of become a principal in New York, jump to Facebook to work on the Workplace by Facebook product, or Meta that we call it now. That was great. At Meta, solution architects did pre and post sales. And it's funny because like you look at a company like Meta and you're like, you have so many resources. What do you mean you have people doing both pre-sales and post-sales? But the fun fact was Workplace was a startup within Facebook. It was literally a company that, a product they were trying to go 0 to 100 in a short span of time. So with that, I was able to like really dive in and have fun with dealing with customers and partnering with the full customer lifecycle journey. And then I was like, I'm ready for product. I'm ready to get into product. So I ended up going back to Dropbox to be a technical product marketing manager, which was weird. And all I ended up doing was like enabling 50 plus global essays surrounding the enterprise features that Dropbox was building. And what I realized is I hate enablement. I love customer facing work. So I got a call from Figma. I got a DM from a group PM at Figma for the enterprise product. And they were like, hey, we're hiring for an essay. It's going to be the first essay. We'd love for you to look at it and see if you're interested. And the rest has been fun these past 13, 14 months. I built the operating model, which was really hard because Figma goes to market with kind of industry principles, designer advocates. And those industry principles are designers by heart. Like that's their trade. That's what they do. They are part marketers. And then of course, Figma enthusiasts. They've used it in live environments. But what they weren't doing was kind of handling the world of security, identity, and scaled management. And those strategies directly relate to enterprise solutions architecture experience. And that's how I built the operating model. And now I'm in a position where I'm trying to like hire a ton of people, just like every other company in the world that's selling SaaS. So that's my journey end to end. During that time, I ended up having like 2 kids, married my amazing wife that chased into New York. And now I'm a New Yorker, a Harlemite. So that's my journey.
Incredible to hear. I mean, that's a great journey. And I think it really bodes into why we're talking about today's topic is you've got a lot of early stage experience in this balance of pre and post sales and kind of working across that dotted line. Because I think why I really was happy that you brought up this topic ahead of time is that my experience comes from early stage companies, right? Like my first two roles where I was kind of hired in the post sale and was doing pre-sales before I either started a pre-sales team or ran the pre-sales org. And there are a lot of folks who come to the pre-sales collective who say, James, I'm the first SC. Where do I start? This is what I'm doing. This is what I don't think I should be doing. And so you've got the experience. And so I'm happy that we're going to be talking about this topic. Let's get into it. You made a couple mentions about go-to-market motion and entire customer lifecycle. So tell us at your current company of Figma, what the go-to-market motion looks like.
This is such a fun question because a lot of people, you either know about Figma or you don't, right? So during the pre-sale cycle, at least for like our enterprise customers, as mentioned, we leverage these industry principal folks to be that technical champion. These are designer advocates. We have account executives and BDRs, or I think, do we call them SDRs or BDRs? I don't know. Anyway, BDRs that will kind of do initial discovery, bring the pain point to the customer, and then they'll work with designer advocates to get the technical win. From there, obviously, with an enterprise customer, they want to understand your security posture. They want to understand, how does your stuff actually work? Is my data going to be secure, especially intellectual property? And then that's when the SA comes in. The solutions architect owns that security objection handling conversation. And I call it objection handling because honestly, you're being tested. They're really looking for that customer assurance along the way. So that's essentially kind of the pre-sales motion. There's three areas that SAs try and insert themselves in that process. Number one, if the business case is built, like the technical one's there, they've got the economic buyer, then like it's all about making sure the customer security has not been involved. We want to get their security team involved. So we're actually proactive in saying, let's have this conversation. The second is sometimes they're like, cool, we want to roll this out to, especially a product like FigJam, we want to roll this out to 12,000 people. So we're like, okay, let's get your identity team involved. Let's figure out the user lifecycle management strategy there. And then the most fun thing now, and the newest opportunity for my team as of February, is that we have this new enterprise product that's all about scaled management and administration of Figma. We have this concept of Figma organization. While at enterprise, you may have many different sub-brands that you want to manage in one Figma organization. So this is what our enterprise product allows. Now we're actually pitching. We're at the point where we're selling Figma again, which I am thrilled about. I know that it's going to help us get the right people involved and who want to be SAs. We do all that, deal executes, but the deal is a land. The go-to-market motion is really about an expand motion. Design, you may think there's designers, product, and engineering, right? You have your designs who think about brainstorming and they actually put together a design. PMs who are thinking about the problem. Does this design meet the problem? And then engineers are like, I love what you designed, but does this fit our technical stack? Let me inspect your design and figure out how do we build this into our stack. But the reality is that to be successful in building product and finding product market fit, you need so many more people involved in the process. You need to think about your marketing team. You need to think about your sales team. You need to think about IT, just anyone that can give you input in the design process, then you want them involved. So that's the expand motion. And part of that is making sure you have assurance on a few things. I talked about user lifecycle management. We want to make sure that people post-sales actually get it implemented. You can pitch all you want. Post-sales is all about what's functionally proper to like be deployed and what actually works. Because I love the art of the possible, but what is possible? And I love being able to partner on both sides of it because it's just something that I appreciate about a go-to-market motion. You're partnering with the customer and their journey. And it's not just about them contracting and then you get your win and you go away. I think that doesn't help anyone. More companies and more startups are going to start expecting the partnership throughout the life cycle of a customer when it comes to this role of pre-sales and post-sales. So I think there's going to be a blended model, especially on the startup side.
I appreciate that breakdown. I'm not going to lie. There's a lot of things there that brought back a little bit of nightmares for me in my experience. I worked for a Belgium-based company when GDPR came to market, and that was a learning experience to say the least. So I understand what you're mentioning about being proactive and getting to security. That's something that I think is really important in early stage companies, and especially as part of your sales cycle, because there might be times that salespeople want to go around that team, but it's good to handle it head on. I like that you talked about how the motion is changing, right? Where you're getting the enterprise motion, you're doing a little more selling and road mapping, because I know that early in my experience, especially Showpad, for example. Showpad, we were selling to marketing folks, but our end user was really the salespeople. And so there was this sale that had to happen, but the implementation was super important, right? And we had to essentially get a team that may or may not have been involved heavily in the sales process, bought into the implementation. And so for us as solutions consultants at the time, we were heavily involved in that post-sale motion. You started to touch on it. I'm curious if you can maybe go a level deeper. What kind of post-sale work do you do in your SA role?
I want to be very careful here. If you're thinking about building this role, if you're the first hire, scope is so important when it comes to post-sales. It's so important. There has to be very specific and focused engagements. And we've codified that. Well, I've codified it when I'm building out this role. So the exact things that we do. So we want to make sure that we run onboarding sessions focused on the jobs to be done by the administrators of the product. And this does not include the actual designers leveraging Figma. We have a team that will enable them. That's the designer advocates. We have weekly sessions that we run, but actually getting this thing configured and at a point where anyone in the organization can join Figma, have some structure, realize the design systems that are built and be effective in either the designing or brainstorming process. We want to make sure that we enable the administrators of this product in very focused onboarding sessions. So that is a core ingredient to a post-sales motion. In that first 60 days, let's get this onboarding session scheduled. Let's make sure we have the right stakeholders, including IT and the champions of the product who are going to administer it. Let's make sure they're involved. And then our onboarding session is very focused about the jobs to be done. So we take a look at the high level, like platform organization admin. We talk about what are the things that you configure at the platform level. This is where we dive into identity and user lifecycle management. So we really focus on if it's Azure AD, if it's Ping Federate, it's Okta, whatever custom system you have. I think I've done a lot of work with Oracle Identity Manager. Let's make sure that you have that process down pat. How do people get access? How do they get into the platform? So we cover that. Then we dive into the second level administrator. We call these Workspace Admins, and we focus about those jobs to be done. They're going to be interacting with the customer every day. They're going to be interacting with the PM, the developer, the engineer, marketing, whoever. So we want to make sure they know what they have to do. That's kind of the focus of our onboarding. And we want to make sure that we time box it. We have minimums in place to make sure that every customer doesn't necessarily qualify for that onboarding session. That's key. So those are our specific things that we do here. Dealing with other products, the SA may be part of the entire pre-sale process. So you may already have a POC in place where you've had these conversations. What we're finding is that there may be a few champions that buy the product. And now it's time to kind of evangelize it internally. And that's when we get to meet all these new stakeholders, where we have to remind them why they bought it to begin with. And then we want to take them through the process again. So you want to codify that early and don't necessarily allow scope creep in that process. So that's one key ingredient to it. And outside of that, post-sale is very much about making sure that your AM or customer success engineer becomes the quarterback of the deal. As much as SAs work to kind of build relationships, until you get to a scaled point where you can have both pre-sales and post-sales, and that will happen eventually if your startup's successful, you want to make sure that you still have someone responsible for that coordination and communication. And even though in some instances it's great to own it, I think it's great to own it during pre-sales phase, but you got to be able to kind of like wave your hand at the customer and say, here's your champion that you're going to work with. And then they'll pull you in when necessary. So own the onboarding, own the actual pre-sale side of executing the deal, but then think of what the handoff is long-term when it comes to post-sales.
It's very clear you are heavily engaged in the entire customer lifecycle. I mean, there's a lot that you're doing on both pre and post sale for sure. And, I think as I continue to talk about post-sale, quote unquote, engagement with SEs and SCs, it's very clear that this new model of SaaS, land and expand, multi-product set, this role just has to be involved. To what level of depth is different based on the companies. But I think about my experience. So one, I used to make a joke to my sales team that they get to sell the dream and I had to onboard the nightmare. That's always my joke about post-sales. Obviously, it wasn't always like that. But this concept, though, is very different of like what the motion and what your role is when you're selling and getting someone to signature versus, okay, you've bought and now adoption and utilization and potentially upsell are the most important metrics. And so for me, that was always a challenge. I always had to switch different hats. I'll be transparent that I used to sometimes even argue in the organization about what our role should or shouldn't be because it was so hard to context switching. Last thing I'll say on this, somebody told me once, it's very different to sell versus to solve. And that was really the difference in that pre and post sale. I'm curious to your perspective, Shamil, what's the biggest challenge for you on having to do both sides?
So pitching versus painting. The way I put it, you have art critics and artists, right? And the art critic will kind of tell you like what good art is and like steer you in the right direction of change your mind of what good art is. But if someone says, here's a canvas and here's a brush, can you go ahead and paint? It's very hard to do. You were talking to an art critic. So the reality is, as a solutions engineer, as a pre-sales individual, nowadays, pre-sales individuals can paint the art of the possible. They have their proof points from customer stories. They know what's possible. They may not be able to actually paint. They may not be able to actually solve. And that's not any fault of the pre-sales individual. That's the reality of today's motion. We need people who are technically minded, who can partner in that journey of the sale. So the challenge there for any person in pre-sales is mastery on the solution side, on the solving side. How can they understand the product enough to actually lift up their hands and execute on that product in a real world scenario where the art of the possible has constraints based on the customer requirements, based on, okay, yeah, we cannot do that because our security team says we can't do that. Well, this whole time you've been painting this vision that this thing is possible. You know, a perfect example of that is like, I think a ton of pre-sales engineers today or pre-sales consultants or just pre-sales, they discuss APIs at depth. Every customer or SaaS product has some type of scalability, extensibility, integration that they love to talk about. And they paint this picture of like, hey, you can do this awesome thing with our APIs. And everybody's like, yes, I want to do that. And then the deal executes. And then that customer is like, remember this beautiful thing that you said that we can do? I now have the team that wants to benefit from that. So how are we going to do this? And then the natural answer in, you know, these large enterprise SaaS companies is, oh yeah, we have a consultancy team that we can bring in. We have professional services. We can write you a statement of work and we can figure this out and you guys can pay us. At a startup, you don't have that advantage. At the startup, you got to be audible ready and you have to be ready to execute. And so that's the reality that if you're prepping yourself to work at a startup, if you're prepping yourself to work at a company that's like still expanding and going up market, that you also have to think about the art of the possible. How do you actually paint? How do you execute that? So that's the challenge because a lot of people can really read those customer stories and start talking about them, but not a lot of people can execute them.
Shamil, I feel like we should change the topic of this episode to pitching versus painting. I really like that you said that. That's pretty good. My favorite part about the podcast is when people say things, I just kind of like reflect back on my experience, and you absolutely nailed it. No longer are the days if you have your own implementation and post-sale team where you can just say whatever on the sales process and then say, okay, this is going to magically happen. Customers will hold you accountable. And it's a lot easier to talk about what the APIs do in theory, but to actually build them and have them execute for a customer is a totally different experience. And it takes usually a different skill set than what a lot of pre-sales professionals have today. And so I really love the picture that you painted for me on the challenges of the role. But let's talk about the opposite. Let's talk about the benefits. What to you is the biggest benefit of being in this type of position?
True customer partnership. There's nothing like it. It's amazing when you get that win and you throw your hands up and everybody's like super excited. I played football in college and of course high school, right? And I'm always down for that team win and the celebration afterwards. But you then get to turn around and you get to see those wins for your customer. You get to be able to like not only see them solve the gaps that you've talked about during the pre-sales, but you can see what are the edge cases? How do they change your business? And you partner with them for that journey. And it's incredible when you see a company shift and change how they build products, especially with a product like Figma. Now, beyond that, you become extremely valuable career-wise. That's the biggest benefit to me. When product PMs are looking to build and solve customer problems, they do their research. They want to understand the pain points, and they build solutions to what they think are the real problems of the customer. If you're purely in a pre-sales mode, all you're focusing on are gaps that are affecting you in selling and executing deals. You're not thinking about the actual problems customers face in the real world when they have to fit a product into a problem set, into a solution. So having the full visibility into the pre-sale cycle and the gaps in selling, and then post-sales and the gaps in implementation and the real world usage, you can pretty quickly at scale codify those, map those to the problem sets, and then pitch that to your PM. And then when your PM gets that level of information, they are going to become your best friends. And at that point, you're going to be in a weird space where you said, do you try and go into product now that you have this massive set of data? But the point is that like you become indispensable. You then become a figurehead in your company, and then you can write your own career off of that. The relationships that you build, PMs will reach out. As mentioned, the group PM reach out to me and say, hey, have you heard of Figma? So that's kind of the benefit of doing the full life cycle, true customer partnership. Because in today's world, when you're selling them, every customer is skeptical. But you got to think about just sales in general. You want something from me when you're talking to me. That's insane. I'm like, you want my money when you talk to me. And it's like immediately you become defensive. So if you're partnered with their success, not just the success of the deal, but also making sure that product you sold them becomes successful in their organization, then you can write your own ticket. There's so many advantages to it. So that's the biggest benefit in my eyes.
I like that a lot. And I love that you talked about the true customer partnership. And I always have this experience that I like to reflect on is that a lot of times in our personal lives, if I called the vet about my dog and I explained to the front desk the situation and they're like, all right, the doctor's going to call you back. And then they called me back 2 hours later and they said, what's going on? And I said, I already explained the situation. And they asked me to do it again. I did it again. And then I took my dog into the vet and I got there and they said, explain the situation. I said, I've done this 2 times. This is the 3rd time. And if you think about it, that experience happens in our personal life. It happens every day in software. And I can reflect back on my own experiences in post-sale that we would get back and get engaged in the conversation. And I would ask the same discovery questions that the SDR asked, that the AE asked in their sales conversation. And the customer is sitting here like, I already went through this. That to me, when you talked about the continuity, the true customer partnership, you're right. You're with them hand in hand throughout the whole process. And so you've built trust. You're not necessarily there to sell and disappear. And I think that they value that level of partnership. And I think that level of accountability is so important in today's SaaS era where, contracts, you can churn, right? You can churn and it's no longer like show up and sell a physical server or sell some sort of hardware that is there, it's deployed and we move on. There are options nowadays. And so I'm really glad that you brought that up. But one of the things I am curious your thoughts though is organizational structure. One of the things that we talk about all the time at PreSales Collective is PreSales Org of the Future. We actually just had a podcast recently with Diana Capallo, who's at Eightfold and was previously at Clary, about creating customer growth solutions engineering teams that kind of come in after the implementation. So this conversation is happening all over the place. And I have to be transparent with you, Shamil, where I get a little anxiety is the scalability. You had mentioned that this model somewhat scales, but what I have seen in my experience is that when you're mapped to customers on the pre-sales and then on the post-sales side, your capacity is expanded, right? So you can't take on new customers, new opportunities, and you have to scale headcount. So I'm curious your thoughts on that type of motion and broadly, what you think this pre-sales, post-sales org should look like. When should they split? When should they be the same? I'm just curious on that broad perspective.
The North Star in all of this is, of course, to make sure that you, at some point, split teams. That's the only way you can scale as a company. At my time at Facebook, that was exactly the problem. You never let a customer go. And that's why I was talking about you have to scope the work that you do post-sales. In the world of startups, you're not going to have the luxury of getting both sides of the fence. As you get additional funding, as you've solidified your product market fit, that's when you really have to think about the customer and building the right team and structure to support them. So the North Star of Figma, I do see separating pre-sales and post-sales. It allows me right now to focus on hiring that SAs, that's our title, that can do both. We can lean someone towards mostly post-sales if that's where their experience lies, but they can dabble in pre-sales and build up that skill set. But I do completely believe that customer success engineering is going to be something that every company is going to have to invest in at some point, especially for companies that have been in SaaS for a while to prevent churn. You think of these companies like Box, Dropbox, and then you think about Microsoft and everything they're delivering with Teams and the scope of functionality there. Box and Dropbox have been met feature-wise, and those companies need to make sure that their customers that have invested in them decide not to change their workflow to Teams or Google, right? Because they're out of parity. So it's all about that experience of solutioning and solving problems and business problems as they come up. So you need a team focusing on discovering those problems, and then you need technical partnership for that. We may be there, but I've been hired 13 months ago. We got to start somewhere. So you're going to work on my team. You're going to be able to roll up your sleeves and pitch and paint, and you're going to be able to do them both. And that's the luxury where Figma's at. I won't say that in 2023, that's going to be the plan. I won't say in 2024, right? We'll ebb and flow as the business needs. The key is understanding the business, where your startup is at. If you're later stage like us and the role is not new, then we're going to be able to start thinking about how do we truly partner in an effective way to expand. And I think at some point you will have to bifurcate those teams. You'll have to separate.
I really appreciate the perspective, Shamil. And I do think you're onto something, because one of the things that I have been no stranger to talk about is that I actually believe that the solutions consultants and implementation folks should be different roles, but they should report to the same executive. And I think sometimes that executive should not be a sales leader. You should have a head of maybe customer solutions or the solutions organization.
Shout it from the mountaintops. Please shout that from the mountaintops. One more time. Can you say that for everybody listening? Wait, clap hands. Everybody listening. Say it again, James. Say it again.
Shamil, I think that solutions consultants and implementation folks should report to the same executive, and I'm not sure that it's sales. And I will tell you that we're working on a couple of things behind the scenes right now about what we think future pre-sales orgs are. I don't think pre-sales is the right word anymore either, but that's a whole other conversation. But you mentioned it. The sales is evolving, all the handoffs, the trust, everything is changing around us. And I think our profession needs to change with it. And these are the things we want to continue to talk about on the podcast. We are at the end of this conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing your perspective, hearing your insights. You've got the experience of being early stage, working both pre and post sale. I would love for you to give some advice to our audience. There are companies and leaders out there that are struggling to figure out their pre and post sales engagement. What advice do you have for those individuals and companies?
You cannot figure this out immediately. Focus on hiring talented folks that can wear a number of hats, and trust those folks to look for gaps. Be prepared to help fill those gaps, though, once they're discovered, which may require more headcount, more people, and software and process. But make sure that as a startup that you're trying to hire people, focus on your customer journey and ensure that the people that you hire that are solutions consultants, SAs, whatever you want to call them, where they can contribute on making sure that they get the technical win, but also making sure that the customer reaps the benefits of that technical win. Again, don't immediately try and figure it out. Just look for talented people that have done this. Make sure you hire them early. You know, I've had a couple of like Series A founders reach out saying, hey, we get this. We're looking for someone to help us build this out. And then make sure that you're always thinking about the customer journey and trusting your customers, because they will give you everything you need to know.
Great advice, Shamil. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed the conversation. Keep up the good work at Figma. Keep me updated on your own journey and your team's journey throughout this process. And we'll see you around the community.
Hey, apply, guys. I'm hiring. Hit me up.
There's the plug. Thanks a lot. Talk to you next time. All right, PreSales Collective. That was a fun episode. Great to meet Shamil in person and then be able to record a podcast after. And as I mentioned throughout the episode and the intro, this is just a topic that really resonates with me. And it's something that has got me thinking a lot. We had Diana Capallo on the podcast. We've done a number of episodes on pre-sales organizations of the future. What is the right organizational structure? What is the right solution? Is there one? Is there a preferred? Are there many? The answer is somewhere probably in the middle of that conversation. But the reality is that sales is changing. And whether you're a small company that has to support the customer throughout the entire life cycle, or you're a large company with multiple resources and multiple teams, people are doing their own homework. Trust has been broken in sales. And this role, whatever the name of the function should be, becomes the pillar and the staple of continuity within the customer lifecycle. And one of the things that really resonated with me is the challenge of pitching versus painting. For me, the most light bulb moment of today's podcast episode is that, as Shamil put it, you have art critics and you have artists. And the challenge is that you're asking one person to be both. And the reality is that painting versus pitching are very different things. They are from a skill set perspective, from a customer experience perspective. But to Shamil's point, the biggest benefit is being in that role and having a true customer partnership. Being a trusted advisor is one of the things that we say this role is. And I brought up my own personal example about my veterinarian experience, but that is the reality of a lot of software experiences that many of us have today. I've had the same experience buying software for the PreSales Collective. We, as a profession, need to figure out what is best for the customer. And I don't know what that answer is. I said it here that I don't even know if pre-sales is the right term anymore for this role. What do we need to do for customer continuity, for the future of sales? What should this role be called? How should it function? And how should it support the customer lifecycle? Because that, at the end of the day, is what this is all about. And do I think a lot of early stage companies like Figma need to have this type of model to go to market, to get started, to grow? They do. And I brought up my Showpad and Revenate experiences doing this same exact thing. But should these two roles and functions sit within the same organization? That is the question that we at PreSales Collective are continuing to ask. And I'm not even sure that there's one size fits all to this answer, but there's probably an organizational structure that could be mimicked by most organizations or by many organizations. I really enjoyed hearing Shamil talk about this today because he has a lot of experience in this domain. He has worked on this at multiple companies in multiple different stages and can really talk about his experience. Because if you heard me ask him, what do you do in post-sale? He does a lot of things in post-sale, and it makes sense for his business. And so I'm curious, if you have a role and you're doing both implementation and sales, reach out to me. Let me know what you like about that role. Let me know what you don't like about this role. If you have a point of view on the org structure, also reach out to me. I'd love to continue the conversation. All right, PreSales Collective. As always, I'll see you next week.